Okay, theoretically, we should be live. Are we live? Can we get some confirmation of this?
Yeah, if we have someone in the comments who can confirm that you can hear us, that would be great.
Yes. Are you receiving us through the audio visual medium? Is our volume okay?
Maddie, help.
While
Okay,
people are
good.
filtering
They can
in,
hear us. They can hear us.
Good. While people are filtering in, I think I'll take the opportunity to apologize for what happened last week, because while I was trying to figure out how to put this stream together, I went into the YouTube studio thing. I went to the live tab, and it specifically said that when I was going in, it was like, you will have the opportunity to adjust the settings before you go live. And I was like, okay, that's cool. And I clicked OK. And then without telling me, it started a live stream, and it sent a ping to both of my Discord servers, to everyone, saying, hey, Bib's just gone live. Here's the link to the live stream. And so then very rapidly, I had lots of people flooding into a live stream that I didn't know was actually happening, wondering what the hell was going on. So blame YouTube, not me. I don't know how that happened. But hopefully this time it's actually cooperating.
It seems like everything's going well, and yeah, they've all come over from Nikolai, so hopefully
Good.
should be good.
Right. So, of course, as soon as we start, there's a siren. I don't know if you can hear that.
I can't hear it
Very
actually.
loud. Oh, good. This microphone is quite directional, I think. Right. So, good morning, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world, everyone. I'm Bib, and today, just in case you don't know, we're doing a live stream as part of the World Building Festival, which I should have linked to, but I didn't. So let's. I can throw a link in.
Is Maddie mod?
I don't know. I think I made her a mod. I can't actually tell on the StreamYard overlay thing. But I've thrown a link in chat that should be the right one to take you to the playlist.
I think it might be worth making her a mod now before we carry on, because yeah, she's not indicated as one.
Let me just fix. Add as moderator. Okay, Madeline James World Builds is now a managing moderator. Congratulations, Maddie.
Okay.
You have been promoted. Okay, so yeah, we're doing this live stream as part of the World Building Festival, which is this massive multimedia collaboration between all these different content creators across the internet landscape. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things all weekend to do with world building, which consequently is, everything that encompasses the world. So it's a lot of stuff. And for today, this is the first of 3 live streams that I'm doing that are of the format of someone who knows more about something than me is going to educate me on it, because I am very ignorant of many things. Anything outside the realms of linguistics and biology, I'm generally very ignorant. So one of the things that I have coming up, well, in general, what I'm planning for future content is to diversify a bit more and get a little bit more out of things that I have any kind of specialism in, including anthropological topics. And one of those areas that I've been keen to look into more, because it's something that I know virtually nothing about, is cooking and cuisine and culinary stuff. And so, in order to learn more about that, I have with me my good friend Jake, one half of the Let's Have a Booba duo. Um, and I will try my best to be as entertaining a co-host as Miles. Um,
It's a tough job. It's a really tough job. Miles
yeah,
Miles is really like I think the heart of Let's Have a Booba. Um, but I do my best. I do my best. Um,
you two have very good rapport with each other, whereas I am um, much more sedate. And also, I should mention that I've never done a live stream before, so if
you
something
did one
goes terribly
yesterday,
wrong,
and we had a great time.
we did. That's true. I've only live streamed within the past day, and I've never been the host of a live stream before. And
Mhm.
generally speaking, technology hates me. So if something goes wrong at any point, do let me know as vocally as you can so I can scramble to try and fix it.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Okay.
Cool.
Um, so to say a little bit more about my background, so on Let's Have a Booba, right now you won't find anything about food, basically, because most of the time, what me and Miles are doing is basically a ripoff of what David and Jesse started on Langtime Studios, but with far lower qualifications. So we do a weekly Conlang stream on Tuesdays, um, and basically each season is just making a language. And saying just making a language sounds maybe a bit simple, but there's quite a lot of stuff that goes into it. But one thing that we did do was, and one of the differences is that we have made a common world for the languages to exist within, which gives us some different possibilities to what David and Jesse have available to them, being based on a future Earth. Um, but the last 2 years, no, a year ago, I finished a master's in social anthropology with a focus on food. So um, I'm quite excited to get to kind of flex those muscles a bit today. Share something. Well, I really love food and the study of it. I think it's really
Are you
interesting.
kidding? Of course. Someone tries to call me as soon as we stop. Shut up. Okay, great. Off to a rip
Classic.
roaring start. Continue.
That's the equivalent of when the postman arrives on Time Studio. Um, okay, so let's get going. I think.
Yes, let's.
So the first topic that I wanted to talk about is feasts, and I've added fasting. It wasn't in the original title of this section, but the two are quite complementary. So um, feasts are a fairly universal, if we can hesitate to say that, event. Um, there's huge varieties in the styles of feasts that people have, but in general, it just means eating a lot and or drinking a lot as a kind of community event. Or, of course, you do have family feasts, which are all kind of associated with different kinds of celebration of community wealth or the elite wealth. So it's a way of enjoying the accumulation of a lot of resources, and so they tend to stand out. Um, um, a few examples would be things like barbecue, um, uh, buffets. It really depends on the exact kind of style of eating and drinking that's going on. An interesting example is iftar, which is the breaking of the fast in um, during Ramadan. So when sun comes down, um, we think of it, but it is a month of fasting during the day. But each evening, people will eat a huge number of calories in order to get them through the next day's fast as well. And they have to eat at very specific times, which has led to a culture of big family get togethers, and a lot of focus on things like desserts. And so there are each year there'll be specific iftar recipes that get popularized. I think Biscoff has been very big for the last couple of years, at least in British iftars. Um, we know that there's a long history of feasts because we find these huge collections of food waste or pottery that may or may not have some residue of food or drink in it.
Mm.
We can tell from like open shells and butchered bones and things. It did make me think of the the snail pile cultures in northern Africa. Um,
Snail pile.
the I think some of the archaeological evidence for some like the people who would become the Berbers are associated with burials with large piles of snail shells. So
Mm.
you can't be sure with archaeology, and this isn't a dig at archaeologists because I'm not one. I'm just not super super well aware of exactly how you would determine a feast that you don't have um, explicit evidence of from something else. But I think it's also that usually the scale for these things tends to be so high that it's a bit like if you have lots of people around and you decide to eat off of paper plates so no one has to do the washing up at the end, and then you just put them all in the bin, except they didn't have like the same waste disposal systems, so
Mm.
you would just kind of, I guess, put them in a hole somewhere. That's the level of archaeological awareness that I have at this point. I'm sure
So
that
it's a lot like
anyone,
the shell middens that you see in the Pacific Northwest cultures, where there are these preserved, like just big mounds of shells from clams and things that they cultivated.
yes, exactly, and particularly if you can date them, if they're dated at the same time and you can tell they've been opened by humans and stuff. And that actually links quite nicely onto a topic I did want to talk about, which is the potlucks and potlatches, which
Mm.
I I have been told that potluck and potlatch were from similar origins, but it turns out that the earliest recording of the term potluck is well before we have recordings of potlatches.
Hmm.
Um, this is mostly because the Pacific Northwest, there was some indigenous writing in some areas, but I don't think that the area where potlatch came from had anything.
Not that I'm
And
aware
so
of.
this is basically just on European records. I'm sure that we can hypothesize that, or based on indigenous narratives, that these are potlatch events. A potlatch basically being where groups take turns giving gifts to other groups in a kind of competition. And so each house would gain prestige by hosting the event. And then the guests try and give away the best gifts that they possibly can, as a way of threatening the hosting status of the status of the host. So it like the potluck is distinct to that in that there will be a place that is hosting, but usually it's seen as a pooling of resources, and it is presented on an equal level. So you may know that like you want to get some of the macaroni cheese that this person brings, and you're avoiding the potato salad. But essentially, you're not. The aim is not to judge people based on the food that they've contributed. It's a way of splitting the cost. Whereas the potlatch is more of a kind of competitive gift giving, which you see in a lot of different cultures. And how the burden passes from the host, who the host gets to kind of do the give the biggest contribution to the event by looking after everyone. And if you're a good guest, and obviously good is culturally relative, then you would go and you would enjoy the host's hospitality, and then maybe to repay them, you host the next time, or you bring a gift. It's where this idea that like you would bring a gift with you if you go to someone like a dinner party or something, like there's all of these kind of tensions between host and guest that play out across a lot of cultures. Um, and potlucks are one way of trying to avoid that tension, because um, in in some cultures, this relationship between guest and host gets very tense. Um, and
So I was just going to ask. So yeah, I'm vaguely familiar with potlatches. I've looked into them a little bit before, but some of the intricacies I don't quite know. So it is. So the host is putting on this. Um, is
event.
Yeah, event. That's the word I'm looking for. As a way of demonstrating their power and prestige, effectively.
Uh, yeah, it's a kind of soft power, right? So
Yeah.
it's not a kind of strength, although of course accumulation of resources often is coupled with that. So if you have like if the leader of the host house has access to more land or sea to accumulate more resources, then it helps. But yeah, it's a kind of soft demonstration.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's some variation in this, but uh, what are the sort of social ramifications of like a stingy host who like just doesn't do enough for the guests?
Well, a stingy host would be essentially seen as losing prestige, and they would um, thus lose social accreditation, like social status, basically. And the stingy host risks being outdone by the guests, who then gain status
Mm.
by outperforming the kind of person who's supposed to be in charge. So it's kind of I like I'm I have a lot in my head right now about like the different ontological structures, so kind of way people see themselves being. And I think it might help to introduce this. So, um, as far as I'm aware, they have clans in the Pacific North America, um, and the totem poles that are very famous,
Mhm.
or I think crest poles is what anthropologists like to call them now, because
Oh,
um, totem is from an Algonquian language, and this is like a different cultural area.
mhm,
Um, so these crests basically represent specific parts of the natural world that these groups associate themselves with. Um, and so there is a kind of competition between these groups that see themselves as being like similarly in competition with each other. Like, say, I mean, obviously, I think in ecology they aren't direct competitors, but like a crow and a bear,
mhm,
like maybe in reality they aren't really fighting over the same sorts of things. But you can there is an understanding that one house will be a different kind of person to another one, and
mhm.
so the prestige is not just about the individual; it's also about the house in general. That the what happens in the events like are a microcosm that represents the macrocosm of the world.
Interesting. And these, like, when we say a person gains or lose status, is that just, I don't know the right anthropological terms for it, but are there like specific um positions in the social hierarchy for this, or is it just like a general vibes thing of like, oh, I saw
Um,
that person at the potlatch last week and he didn't do a very good job, so I don't like him as much anymore, or will they effectively be like demoted in the kinds of things they're allowed to participate in society?
I don't actually know enough about the specific Pacific Northwestern cultures to answer that properly.
Okay.
But I think like if I introduce the example from Melanesia, I think that like it would be a good comparison. Um, so um, Marshall Salins is an anthropologist who is very big in contrasting um, the Polynesian societies, which tend to be larger, more stratified, um, and they have um, it reminds me of like the British class system where you're born in a certain status level and you can't really lose it. So you're born into power, basically. Whereas in Melanesia, so places like Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, things tend to be small and loosely ordered. That's a direct quote. Um, um, so rather than um, rather than like being born with an associated status level, in Melanesia, they have these people, these men who get called big men in the literature, who achieve um, political power basically through reciprocal acts of generosity. So you, a lot of this is done with pigs and pearl shells. Um, there's an example that gets given a lot, which is those two things in the Mocha exchange in Mount Hagen. So that's on Papua, I think. Um, But basically, this is a similar kind of competitive gift giving. Um, but rather than always trying to go higher than the host, um, when you give a gift to someone, um, you can respond to that by giving either the same amount, which cancels the debt. So when you give a gift, there is an expectation that there will be a reciprocal gift, right?
Hmm.
Um, or you go above that, which basically pushes the burden of the debt. This is often called Hau in the literature, HAU, which is the Maori word for this, but um, Maori activists are. Some people don't like the fact that it's been turned into a general term. So usually we just say
Sure.
burden of the gift now. Um, and basically, um, because of these gifts, the big man can then um, form around them a kind of uh, like they can take on a lot of wives and have a lot of children who then all contribute to them producing more resources to then provide even bigger gifts to the other big men, right?
Hmm.
Um, so um, the more wives you can support, the more work they can do to then produce more stuff. Um, and yeah, um,
So does that mean though, it just occurs to me, the obviously, as you say, more wives, the more work power you have to generate more resources. But presumably, you also have to provide for everyone in your kinship group. So
yeah,
is it like a double-edged sword kind of balancing act sort of thing?
yeah. So if you get to a point where you can't reciprocate the gifts that you've been given, essentially you'll lose your status and potentially the your kin. Um, and so, um, especially if I don't actually know exactly how this works with kind of warfare, but you can you can imagine that someone like it's again fairly universal violence against women. Competing forces come in, take a bunch of women as a war prize, um, and then they add them into their kin unit, which then kind of bolsters their um, position with their reciprocal big men, basically. Like, I mean, although the interesting thing is that in Papua, of course, like they haven't really formed very large contiguous political units, right? And so part of this system is that because it's reciprocal, no individual can possibly get to a point where they form the long term stratified status that you see in Polynesia. And this is in an area where there are more natural resources. So, um, like things like bananas and taro originate in Papua, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
these they have a huge wealth of like volcanic soil and an abundance of plants. And you'd think that having a lot of resources might encourage large societies, but it basically allows for these small societies um, to carry on, basically.
Hmm.
Um,
Interesting.
um,
I'm
and
reminded, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I'm a
Mhm.
biologist, so I'm just relating the examples to things that I know vaguely about. But I'm reminded of the situation in vampire bats, because like vampire bats have they need to drink, I think, their own body weight in blood every week or they die. And so they live in these big social roosts where a hungry individual can ask a well fed individual to regurgitate some blood for them. But there's always the expectation that um, the hungry bat will at some point later return the favor. And if they don't, then they're kicked out of the roost. Um, and so I'm wondering, I don't actually know very much about like the internal social structure of these roosts. I wonder if there's like any kind of hierarchy in the group that goes into determining. But I'd have to look into more about that later.
No, it sounds like an interesting comparison, and certainly those sorts of examples show that this isn't just like a human thing.
Mm-hmm.
Other species are aware of these kind of social burdens and things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, um, I'm trying to read through my notes to see if there's like something else that is useful. Um, um, so yeah, the other thing is that there's no culture of inheritance in Papua. So basically, like family family models can't like you don't. I don't think people would associate themselves with a long chain of relations because people aren't passing the accumulated wealth onto their children. Um, um,
So, what happens to the wealth then? Is it just redistributed among everyone?
I suspect
Look,
so.
okay.
I think it's also a little bit complicated because again, we have these like anthropology is full of quite general models, and then you ask two anthropologists who have worked on different specific cultures in Papua, for example, and they'll say, no, it's not like this because the people I've worked with do this, and the other one will say, actually, no, it's like this because the people I worked with do this, and in
Hmm.
reality, the and even um, within ethnic groups, I mean, obviously, some ethnic groups are huge, like you wouldn't expect within the Han ethnic group for like people in I do have some examples of like people in Taiwan and people in northern China who would both identify as Han. Um, they have most essentially structurally um, opposing models of the guest host relationship just because of um, the kind of specific local factors that go into it. Um, um, if yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so um, one thing you had asked was whether there are specific factors that go into when fasts and feasts take place.
Yes. How do these things sort of get established?
So uh, my first response is usually some kind of symbolism through analogy. So um, if um, like if you have like a day where like I'm thinking of like the um, it's just called Moon Viewing Festival. Um, uh, no, it's for it's the same day as Tanabata, and now I can't remember. Is it Chichi? Anyway, like if the moon is particularly important, you might eat things that look like the moon on that
Hmm.
day, or um, you have things like harvest festivals are kind of funny because You, depending on what stage of the harvest you're in, what a feast for the harvest might look like is different. Um, so if you're at the start of a harvest, then people might be really busy, and the food crops may have been only recently renewed. I'm also aware of things like, so with rice, you can eat rice at various levels of ripe. I don't know if ripeness is the right word, or development,
I know,
basically.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
And so there might be specific foods that you make with the slightly underripe rice that then, because they are considered special to that period in the rice growing season, become a kind of festival around that. And it could be that, like, there was a specific battle that happened around the time that, like, things will coincide incidentally and then become culturally associated,
Hmm.
is kind of how I would go about approaching it.
Okay.
Um,
Because I don't know if this would be relevant or interesting to get into at this point, but with one of my worlds, the Refugium, it's not a planet. It's got its own setup. But one of the things about it is that there are no seasons. Um, just generally speaking, any particular area of land will experience more or less the same temperature just year round because just the sun doesn't move. It's always in the same point in the sky, and therefore any particular area's climate zone is pretty fixed, and there's no seasonality. And that means that there are no like seasonally adapted plants. So there's not going to be, as far as I can work out, there's not going to be any like seasonal harvests. Like it's not like any particular crop will only grow during a certain time of the year because the conditions don't change. So the only thing that I can think of is that if food, well, that doesn't actually make sense now that I think about it, but the there are certain festivals during certain parts of the year, mostly to do with the celestial alignments, because there's a series of moons that, well, moons, they're not actually moons, long story, but they align in certain ways throughout the year.
mhm.
And like particularly on New Year, there's a very specific alignment. Um, and so if I don't know how predictable like the types of food and the availability of food would be at any particular time of year. So yeah, I don't know exactly how to go about coming up with ideas for like specific feasts.
Um, if they have this kind of calendar, you can do symbolism based on numbers alone. So if it's like the first month, then people could all share one huge thing that symbolizes like the kind of sharing of a new beginning
Uh,
or something. Or
okay.
I was actually thinking of, I'm trying to remember now why it's called Pepero Day. I think it's the on the 11th of November in Korea. People
Oh,
people eat these, like, it's like pocky,
yeah, the
and
little
it's
sticks.
and if you told a Korean person that before the introduction of Roman, not Roman, Arabic numerals, I don't think they would understand for any reason why you would do that. Um, but because it's, yes, 1111, people will just make associations between things.
Hmm.
Uh, like um, I'm also thinking of like Black Day in Korea. I think it's the one
Oh
that's
yeah.
like for singles, and I
Ye-
think
yeah.
the symbolism is that it's lonely, so it's like I don't think it's a good thing that we associate darkness with sadness. Like it's considered like fairly problematic for people of African heritage that like the the word we use for their race is the same as what we refer to evil as. But
Mm,
um, uh, but basically, um, um, that people will eat jjajangmyeon on Black Day. So jjajangmyeon or jjajangmyeon, they're slightly different, but they're two versions of the same dish, which is um, noodles with a kind of fermented soybean sauce that is fried, but the color is very black, and so people will just it can feel like free association where
yeah,
um where you just have to think about like you can just make not a random connection um
sure.
um and as long as the connection is reinforced, then I think it works. Like I mean
Okay.
the least culturally I would say specific thing would be kind of fasting is a it's a kind of opposite feast, right?
Yeah,
But for so fasting is like basically a kind of personal sacrifice, and it works on the logic that um, kind of if someone else has sacrificed something for you, then you would honor them by sacrificing something yourself. I think
sure.
is generally how that works.
So it's still based on the principle of reciprocity,
Um, it's not
sort
necessarily
of.
reciprocal in a true sense because, like, say that you fast during Lent, right?
Mhm.
Or you fast like fasting in Lent and fasting in Ramadan are interesting comparisons because in Lent it's about the analogy with the sacrifice of Jesus, and so you but of course like in theory it makes you like a you're showing your obedience to Christ and God, and so there is a kind of relationship there. But if you're approaching it from a secular perspective, like there isn't a maybe with saints it's a better comparison. So on specific saints days, I think it's more for religious communities. So like monks and nuns will have specific feast days and fasting days, and you do it as a way of honoring the saint, but not necessarily because you think that the saint will help you out.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. When I say reciprocal, I don't mean like with the expectation that anything's going to be repaid. I mean in the sense of like, what's the how do you put it? Like doing unto others as you would have unto yourself. That's not the right way to say it, but that sort of thing.
uh, yeah, is I feel like I'm leaning into grammar terms, and I don't think reflexive makes sense either. Um, there's probably an anthropologist with a Latin word for that. Anyway,
Sure. Yeah, I think I get it.
yeah. Whereas like in Islam with Ramadan, the fasting is more about discipline and making yourself someone who is properly obedient, um, rather than being about. Okay, I trust Mateus on this. um,
Yeah, yeah.
so
I would classify it as altruism.
so yeah, um, um, Okay. Is there anything else that? Um, oh, I want to talk about the koala people.
Oh, yeah, this was a more speculative idea that I had that I wanted to run by you. So it is like when I think of feasts, again, ignorant though I am, like when I think of feasts, I think of like a very large variety of food, and like as it seems to me, like a lot of the sort of social aspect of food is to do with different kinds of food and the different ways that foods are prepared and all that stuff. So I'm wondering how much, like, completely hypothetically, if humans, for example, could only eat, say, eucalyptus leaves, if that was the one and only form of food that humans could metabolize, would food still have the same kind of social aspect to it? Would there still be things like feasts and fasts, etc., or would everyone just carry around a bag of eucalyptus leaves and just munch on those throughout the day?
So I got quite excited thinking about this, particularly like
Oh,
I got a flash of like Savala, the board game David and Jesse are making, like an Australian twist with like huge koala people who become more humanoid, but they still haven't developed a way of not just eating like eucalyptus leaves and the occasional insect and like poop. Um,
yeah, that's going to be a problem for the babies, but we won't talk about that.
um, so what I my first response was that for us, um, basically there are a whole load of things that we could eat, but we choose not to, right?
Mhm.
So in theory, like in the UK, for example, people used to eat a lot of nettles, but now we've really stopped eating them. And so a lot of people see like a nettle bush or whatever, and they wouldn't walk past thinking, oh, like a food source. Um, and so you could um, you could extrapolate that process. So if people if a person only eats a very small range of things from our perspective, it essentially would my prediction would then be that unless you could confirm that each leaf had exactly the same flavor, nutritional value, shelf life, and all of that stuff, then you would find people who would be like eucalyptus leaf sommeliers who would be able to tell the difference between different kinds of eucalyptus leaf. You would have different ways of preparing eucalyptus leaf.
Mhm.
The might be that some koala people know how to dry the leaves and process them into a tea, uh, or that the powdered leaves are somehow lower quality than the whole leaves, and so the poor koalas drink the eucalyptus tea, and um, the rich koalas only eat whole eucalyptus leaves. Um, like like
Okay.
people love finding ways to make themselves seem better than other people. Um,
Mhm.
and so unless you have like a biological mechanism that's really going to disprioritize that, I suspect that like it makes me think of like the if in doubt sexual competition. I think like for food world building, if in doubt, people will find a way to stratify things. Um,
Interesting.
um, so there are cases where like So I think this is based on some research done in Kumasi in Ghana, where basically foods like rice have supplanted a lot of traditional carbohydrate eating, which was mostly based on like pounded tubers, so like pounded yam and like fermented plantain that was also then pounded, like um, the like a lot of kind of soup and what they call swallows, because basically um, the carbohydrates are so processed by the time you eat them that they're basically just there to carry the flavor of whatever your soup or stew is, and you don't have
Wow.
to chew them. Um,
Hmm.
and because you're basically just eating these balls of processed starch, it really fills you up. And so even if you think you felt full eating rice, for these people, the feeling of eating this like pounded starch really makes them feel like they've properly eaten. Um, and so um, you have what's actually like a very um, like there's a lot of similarity between what people eat in general. Um, um, but um, when people do have pounded yam, it's usually because it's quite often people who can afford to have multiple wives. And so because they have more labor available to them, they'll take it in turns to feed their husbands, and they want to feed them the food that really satisfies them, and so they will pound the yams for them, basically.
Hmm.
And it does have a, even in like their own culture, it has a there's a euphemistic tone to it as well, because of the symbolism. Again, things tend to carry over a lot across cultures.
Hmm. That's the
Um,
main thing I'm taking away so far is symbolism and stratification.
yeah, um, uh, I'm. I think that leads us quite nicely onto the next section. Um, is there anything? Let me check for questions. Um, because I know that there was one. Yeah, I don't know how often potlatches were, but I don't imagine it was yearly because people would want to host these events as often as they could afford to, basically, because of the potential of gaining prestige from it. Um, but you could associate it with a particular event, like a lunar cycle or
Hmm.
like a equinox or that sort of thing, um, or like I was looking at how Indigenous Australian seasons work, and they tended to have them start and end based on the appearance of certain plants or insects, but they
Ah,
aren't even in span. Um, and so you could you could basically time it so um, um, like obviously it doesn't work if you don't have seasons, but if you're raising pigs for a pork eating festival, there will be a certain point in time, because they tend to, like, if their reproductive cycles are also essentially on a yearly basis, that there would be a time of year which is best for eating the pigs, essentially.
sure,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, interesting. Because I'm thinking, I still haven't made any firm decisions about this, but I'm thinking that each month and possibly as well each day of the week, because it's confusing to explain. But the way the moons work, each day there's a different moon that's visible. There are 6 moons in total. Yeah, there's 5 inner moons and 1 outer moon. Yeah. And so if each of the moons have a different thing that's associated with them, then that could go towards defining what the festival associated with that particular moon is. So that gives me something to work with. That's cool.
Oh, and a final point on the eucalyptus world was that because they will try and find these differences, you also, depending on how their economy works, end up with novelty becoming important. So one thing that you can't underestimate is that people like having new experiences. People get bored of eating the same things. And if you're a peasant and you don't have the wealth to access things from distant places, the novelty is likely to be seasonal. So you can grow stuff yourself and it will be new because you haven't had it since that time last year, basically, which is, again, how some of these seasonal things become important. But of course, if oh no, now I've just thought of a random example of funeral feasts, like in Romania, where they have this chocolate cake that's everyone's favorite cake, but they only make it for funerals.
Oh.
Um, and I think that part of why people think it's their favorite cake will be because they, of course, it will probably be good, but it will be a kind of expense that you would only put into celebrating important events, like at a funeral. Um, and there's also, I know for Mormons, they have funeral potatoes that are supposed to be very good, which is a similar sort of concept of you get your best recipes out when someone dies. Or it may, I think that people do eat the funeral potatoes at other times, but they know that they have to make them for funerals, basically. Okay. We're an hour in and we've got 3 more topics. So I think
Excellent.
I'm gonna speed up a bit. Um, I'm kind of, yeah. So prohibitions and classifications is a kind of area that people tend to know a bit about because people will have heard of things like pork prohibitions. So it's forbidden in kashrut, which are the Jewish dietary laws, and it's also explicitly haram in Islam. Um, and people in Christian societies who have ignored the pork prohibition have found it very curious that these other people, for a long time, Jewish people and Muslims were the primary cultural other. Particularly if we've, like, I'm also trained in like Hispanic studies, right? So for Spain, like there was this obviously direct conflict, and then a lingering fear after the expulsion of Jews and Muslims that that some Jewish people and Muslims will have stayed in the country, and so you can kind of see that you have these two cultures, or three cultures, sorry, and the pork prohibition in Islam and Judaism produces a culture in Spain where pork is added to huge numbers of things. It's very difficult to be vegetarian in Spain because so much pork was added to everything just to try and it was a kind of public display of your Christian identity, basically. And this is kind of some of the origins of food nationalism that we can touch on at the end.
Cool.
Um, I I had put in one reason for the pork taboo that I was told in school, which was basically the theory that because pork flesh is supposed to be the most similar to human flesh, that that people would have um, people would have basically uh, have decided not to eat pigs based on that comparison. How people found
But
this out, I have no idea.
I have also heard that, and I've also heard that it's not true. Both in the sense that that idea is not actually the origin of pork prohibition, but also that pig meat is not actually the most similar meat to human meat. It's actually, I think, veal. Don't ask me how I know that.
And so, of course, like you have other explanations, like the idea that pigs are unclean, or that uh, like Bib said that like in Deuteronomy it says that for meat to be kosher, it's from an animal that chews the cud and has split hooves.
Yeah, which just struck me as very uh, categorical. Like it's not just a list of like these are the animals that you shouldn't eat. It's like look at these specific traits and like it's these things that make the animal clean or unclean, if you want to
Mhm.
frame it like that. I thought that was quite interesting.
So um, uh, to kind of put a little pin on the origin of the pork taboo, I think the answer is that we don't categorically know exactly why, but one of the strongest arguments I'm aware of is that essentially the rejection of pork was also a way of defining the community is a rejection of something that many cultures around them were participating in. And so, similarly to, I mean, Mateus, I see your comment. It's true that in Spain, not the poorest people wouldn't have been regularly eating pork on a regular basis. Although to be fair, it was most important only if you were eating in public or in communal settings. And so it wasn't that every meal had to have pork in, but specifically that you had to demonstrate your pork consuming tendencies um, to the public. Uh, so in Portugal, they had a similar thing, and the Jewish people started making sausages that would look like pork sausages, but they weren't made with pork. Um, and that was how they kind of got around some of that. And now everyone eats the allier, which is, uh, yeah. Um,
Hmm.
um, so um, the kind of classic, like, there's been a lot of work done on this. And the important line to remember is matter out of place. So, matter out of place is a kind of general anthropological term that comes from a book called Purity and Culture. Um, is it Purity and Culture? No. Purity and. No, Purity in Danger, yeah, by Mary Douglas. Um, and basically, she was working in Africa with a specific group that I don't remember because I think I have read this, or at the very least I've read extracts. Anyway, the specific group isn't necessarily important, although I do prefer that to just saying Africa. But anyway, basically she noticed that there were similar prohibition um, models in this group that would have been minimally influenced by Judaism and Islam. Um, and part of that she understood as being about the relationship that people have with waste, which is where this idea of the dirty animal comes in useful because,
Mhm.
or not useful, but is where it's relevant because um, the association of something uh, with waste and the kinds of, and I don't mean like specific kinds of waste when I say waste. I mean things that are culturally considered waste. Um, so um, it maybe the best example of this I'm aware of was that in indigenous Andean culture, there was not the same blood taboo that you see in a lot of other cultures. And so they ended up attributing fertility to blood rather than dirtiness, which meant that
Mhm.
there then isn't a period taboo in Andean culture before the arrival of Christianity. Um,
Huh.
and the period taboo is considered to be so universal because blood is usually, you would associate bleeding with danger or woundedness.
Uh-huh.
And then that, um, and so if someone is bleeding, it's that the blood is in the wrong place. And so if someone has a period, it's a kind of out of placedness that then becomes a kind of pollution.
Mhm.
Um, and this kind of cultural pollution um, is why you have so many um, specific kinds of prohibitions, basically. Um, and um, um, and then classification is kind of the other argument, basically. So um, when when in Deuteronomy it says that they have to chew the cud and have split hooves, that's basically the people trying to form a systematic relationship of
Uh-huh.
what the correct way for something to be is, basically.
Mhm.
Um, and when something falls outside of that model, um, it it's out of place. So um, because the like say like I think maybe a good like other example would be in Japan where they prohibited people from eating land animals, but people were allowed to eat birds and fish during the, I think it was Tokugawa period. Anyway, you had like this very Buddhist guy, and he didn't want people eating certain kinds of meat. And people so wanted to eat land animals that they end up reclassifying rabbits as birds in the classifier, and this is the linguistic classifier system.
Wow.
Um, and I heard this story that it's based on like the ears of rabbits looking a little bit like wings.
Wow.
Um, and I don't think if you ask a Japanese person, they would say, yes, a rabbit is a kind of bird. But the power of classification is that it allows people to say, oh, this is one kind of thing and this is another kind of thing, and we eat that kind of thing, but not that kind of thing. And so it's kind of similar to stratification, except like but of course, well, yeah, it is stratification basically. It's putting the analogy of better and worse people onto the world. And so you have kind of acceptable plants and worse plants, and you have acceptable
Sure.
animals and lower animals. I mean, you can think about like the way that we treat cats and dogs compared to ants, or
Sure.
so we, and that isn't universal. So uh, if you follow either live or afterwards at some point, I'm going to talk about ontology in a lot more detail. So the way that people see themselves as existing in the religion stream. Um, but yeah, basically, if you see other individual animals as being like yourself, then there tends, in my understanding of it, to no, actually, no. People do recognize that there is a difference in the bodies that things have, right? So they know that the body of a capybara is different to the body of a human, is different to the body of an eagle. But if a hunter sees an eagle, they might see the eagle as being a hunter like them, rather than someone like a very different kind of um, from our perspective, we would say, oh, they are an animal like us, and they have similar bodies that are made of muscles and they have brains. But we would say that the eagle has no sense of being a hunter in the way that a human has a sense of
Hmm.
being a hunter, right? That was a bit of a tangent.
No, no, that's all good.
Um, so I hope that like that idea of matter out of place and classification is useful for how you would decide what a taboo is. Oh, and you said you had an example of a taboo in one of your own
I do.
conmels.
It's not very nuanced, but am I able to is it gonna let me share screens? It didn't
I
yesterday. Oh,
can.
it's letting me share screens.
Oh,
Uh,
oh,
um,
okay. I'll upload my slides again. Okay, here we go. But yeah, you can move it up to the stage, I think.
um, no, it's not having it. Hold on. Present? Why does it need to make everything so difficult? I just want
What are you trying to share?
an image file, because for some reason it's not letting me share screens of the actual image itself, which is just
Mm-hmm.
great. Um,
So is it on the bottom row?
just give me 1 second to actually find intermission. Entertain yourselves in the meantime. Um, okay, it's about time. I've got the file and it's not there. Great. There was an issue with your file.
Mm.
Wonderful.
Oh,
Okay,
so
well,
in response to Iba, food prohibition in Buddhism is a bit different because it's in the Vinaya, so the Buddhist manual on how to do things. Basically, um, the food prohibition is really supposed to be for the Sangha, which are the community of monks and nuns, or bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. Um, that's I think that some people would use the indigenous, like the true plural form, and I don't know if bhikkhu and bhikkhuni, I think those are singular anyway. So the food prohibitions are enforced at temples, but also there's enough people in general have a fair amount of distance from the actual teachings of the Vinaya, and there will be a certain amount of institutional um, um, uh, what would you call it? Like institutional memory of, well, this is just how we've always cooked, or there will be whatever, like cooks come in with food memories. So if a monk ate well when they were growing up and they learned how to cook like that, they can take those ideas and apply them in their temple kitchen. Whereas if you grew up only eating rice porridge, and you know that that's fine for the Buddhist kind of the laws in the Vinaya, then you may just make everyone, if you're the cook at the temple, eat rice porridge. Um, the other thing with the Buddhist one is that people will accept offerings for food. Um, and in that case, as long as they know that an animal hasn't been slaughtered directly for them, they will in general eat whatever is made if it's what people offer them. And so there isn't like a strict rule that says you will never eat beef in Buddhism for monks or for the laity. It's frowned upon because it's a kind of violence. But in terms of what people actually end up eating, people will eat small amounts of beef, um, and then the monks, if they are given the beef, will eat the beef too. And so, in general, if they aren't like in an isolated monastery, they will end up eating a more omnivorous diet anyway. Uh, you could you make the image a PDF and then try putting that up?
Oh, it says I'm sharing it now. Can you see it?
I can't. Is it on? At the bottom where?
How about that?
Okay, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about that. I don't know why sometimes it just doesn't give me the option to share screen. And then sometimes, like a few minutes later, it just changes its mind. But anyway, so this, as I say, this is not a particularly like mind-blowing or creative example. This is just something that so in the refugium there is this particular species of animal. Um, it's found across the whole world, so every culture has a different name for it. In Adun, it's called a Nalkrachtu, which literally means like the great sickness, um, because these are universally considered to be very like and kind of deserved. They are considered to be very like filthy animals. Like they are these very aggressive pack hunters. They are primarily scavengers. They hang around, corpses a lot. They have like special immune systems that mean they can harbor a lot of disease. I don't know exactly how much I want to lean into this, but they might have a similar thing to how like Komodo dragons used to be perceived, where before we knew that they do actually have venom glands, um, it was thought that when a Komodo dragon bites you, um, the bacteria content in their mouth was just so high that you would like very rapidly succumb to sepsis. Um, so yeah, they're universally considered to be just very filthy animals. And so I imagine that in a lot of cultures there would be a quite sensible taboo against eating them because, like, in a lot of cases, they will actually be like quite dangerous to eat. So, yeah.
One thing that could be interesting is I'm thinking of have you ever heard of the agori in India? I think
It sounds familiar.
particularly around Varanasi. So the agora, no, the I think it's the Agori. Um, although I should learn more Indo-Aryan languages because I should be able to do plurals like that. Anyway, um, basically, it's this group of, I don't know what word they use for them, if they're a kind of sadhu, like a kind of wise person. But basically, um, they they're Shivite, so they worship Shiva or Shiv. Um, but basically, um, their belief is that they will achieve like purity, like not purity or like purity of like upman, like soul. I think um, basically by surrounding themselves with dirty things, and so they're known for swearing at people, and they don't wear clothes, but they cover themselves in human ashes. Um,
Hmm.
so my thought is like, if these are actually, if they are in theory edible, you could have a cult, like a small cult somewhere, that they believe that eating the dirty things will transform them somehow into something else. Um,
Hmm.
as a kind of uh, like, it's just my kind of thought process, because wherever you have taboos, you have people who want to transgress them. It's another another semi-universal thing, is that people will see a rule and they will want to go against it. Um,
And actually, it does occur to me there is a group or organization of people in this world that are, I don't want to say immune to disease, but they're certainly like capable of harboring more disease than the average person. So that could be almost like um, it could be like a part of like identifying as part of that group. Like we eat the flesh of this thing. That's kind of cool.
the other thing is, and I'm going to bring it up in the religion stream if you're interested, people watching at home. Um, so in the caste system, there are specific Dalit groups who are specifically tasked with dealing with the bodies of dead cattle, because it wouldn't be considered appropriate for a savarna, so someone who has a caste or from the upper castes. I mean, I don't know, class politics are probably a bit too much to get into this early in the day, but basically, if you have those people who are immune to disease, it may be that people employ them to deal with the bodies of these creatures because
Mhm.
of some perception of their association or something. Um,
Well, these people are, don't know how much I want to get into this, but they are like religious fanatics essentially.
mhm.
So the way they interface with more um, with other cultures might be a bit um, what's the word? They wouldn't gel like 100%. They wouldn't be like accepted members of society in a lot of places, but there's certainly
Yeah,
possibility
as
for it.
Hannah's saying, like, so in Japan they had the Burakumin, who were basically the people who carried out burials. They tanned leathers and they were butchers, basically. And they were forced to live in hamlets outside of the main cities. Although these have now become, because of urban expansion, these former hamlets are now incorporated into Japanese urban areas, but they're still systematically poorer and have lower opportunities than the areas around them.
Hmm.
Um, and because of the utility of having these people who could do the things that weren't considered cleanly enough for most people to do. Um, they have a kind of relationship where the the rest of the folks look down on them, but they know they need them to do all of the stuff that they can't do because of the prohibitions, basically.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so they
Yeah,
could still be, even if no one is happy about the situation, they're useful enough that societies would need some of these disease cultists to hang around and help them out with stuff.
yeah. Well, it would depend on kind of how many bodies they're dealing with and stuff. But yeah,
Hmm.
like again, stratification, it comes for us all.
Yeah, all down to stratification.
um, okay. Um,
So it's
Food security. So I'm a lot more aware of the contemporary situation with this. And by contemporary, I mean Qing Dynasty, which I know isn't contemporary for everyone. But um, so food security for a very long time has looked like grain stores for a significant amount of the world's population, I will say. I don't mean a significant number of the world's cultures because there are so many that don't use grain, that doesn't have the particular need for careful storage. So um, grains have to be harvested when they are ripe, and then they can be stored carefully for reasonably long amounts of time, basically. Whereas if you were making a culture based on things like tubers, like potatoes, the potatoes can usually be left in the ground. The leaves will wilt, which is really when you kind of have to harvest them. But there are ways of growing potatoes so that they essentially store themselves in the earth. Um, and other things with tubers that aren't gonna rot. You're basically going until the plant says no, I can't keep going anymore. Um, and also flavor is more concentrated in smaller plants or smaller
oh,
fruits. Um, and so like if you have they did this with squash. So you can get squash to grow to be huge, like like the pumpkins that you would carve at Halloween or whatever. But those squash are so big that they basically just taste of water and fiber, which isn't really appetizing to people.
mhm.
Um, Whereas if you have basically um, like one thing that they did to make squash tastier was they tried to make them ripen but smaller, concentrating the sweetness. Um, so, like that's why butternut squash has is quite dense, and they encourage like the growth of the long, tall bit. I think. I don't know what the right word for that part of a
I
squash is.
Botany was never my strong suit.
Hmm. Um, so yeah, after that tangent, um, yeah, so grain in these societies like becomes very important, particularly because it's often used also as a form of taxable production.
Hmm.
So if everyone grows wheat or rice, they can then contribute a certain amount of it to a state grain store, which then functions like a kind of bank and also has the added benefit that it is a model of protection that your centralized authority can provide so that if people need food, um, they can um, make it cheaper or dish it out, basically,
Mhm.
which was how the chain grain stores worked. Um,
Now, I think you might know much more about this than me, but I was thinking about like grains, as you mentioned, are relatively easy to store, whereas tubers, I can't remember in the Andes, there are these specific structures. I can't remember what they're called, but they're essentially like granaries, but without grain. They're specifically for like I think it's freeze-dried potatoes,
mhm.
and you know what I'm talking about, right? So
Yeah,
would that
so the
essentially
freeze
serve the
dried
same function?
yeah, the freeze dried potatoes are called chuño. Um,
Junior, that's it.
um, in Quechua, it's chuño, I think. So um, that's like it's a specific advantage of the tuber there as well because um, they have the ability to naturally freeze dry stuff on the mountain tops. Whereas, like, if you're thinking of like cassava in the Amazon, they can't like. I guess if you had like people with like for the I've thought about suggesting this for the dragon pillar world actually that Maddie
Mm.
could if people grew tubers on the fertile ones, they could then use the very tall ones as like flash freezers to have
Ah,
the same effect. Um, with if you have two towers that are radically different in height, basically. Um,
mm,
um, so,
yeah, just the tall one just becomes a big refrigerator, basically.
mhm.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, people will try and find ways of storing food. Um, and an interesting expansion of this is that in China they have done this with pork now. So because of the famine in the Great Move, Great Leap Forward, I think that was the time it was. Anyway, in the early part of the history of the People's Republic of China, you have this huge famine, and the Communist Party essentially works really hard to prevent another famine happening. So they focus a lot on how they can actually improve the amount of food that people are making. Um, 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 thanks. Anyway, I'll ignore them. Um, so um, when the middle class forms um, in China more recently, one of the things that's associated with is greater accessibility to food, and particularly meat. And in China, pork is particularly symbolic because it's also associated with, like, historically with yang energy. And so
Oh.
for things like ancestor worship, pork is used as a way of symbolizing the yang energy uh, of the male line, and then it's shared amongst other men. Um, so again, on prohibitions, traditionally women weren't allowed to partake in this like commemorative pork eating because
Hmm.
they were not because they were women and they were yin in their gender. It wasn't considered appropriate for them to take part. But now, because of the one child policy, um, daughters are demanding to be involved
Wow.
in these clan uh, pork sacrifice. Uh,
Wow.
yeah,
Interesting.
um, and the pork reserves are there basically so that if there were a situation where people were going to lose access to pork, the Chinese government can preserve their status as a kind of good um, a good state in the eyes of the people by supplying them with pork to preserve the kind of quality of life that they have. But they didn't have this before.
Cool.
Um, um, do we want to talk about the neotex now?
I was gonna
Give the
say
people what they
if it's
want.
the appropriate point. Um,
Yeah,
this
I think I've said everything that I had
okay.
suggested.
So I don't know how much we want to get into this, considering we only have 24 minutes left.
Hmm.
But so
I'm fine with leaving out food regionalization unless, like, if you comment that you really want to talk about regional food, I'll do it. But I think that it's my like very short statement on that is that people overestimate how much national it's like if you know enough to know that nationalism and the nation state is relatively modern, you should know that national cuisines are even more recent than that, basically.
cool. Well, if we have time, we can maybe do
Yeah.
some footnotes about that. But so how do I'll try and get through this as quickly as possible. So in alien biospheres, um, we have the neotacts, which are the sapient species that I'm going to be doing some. I still don't know if I can actually call it anthropology if it's not about humans, but I'm going to be doing culture building stuff with them soon. Um, and the neotects are predominantly carnivorous. They evolved from largely carnivorous ancestors. They can eat plants, but it's not typically something that they'll go for. Like they, at least in their ancestors, they would go for like roots, tubers, seeds, and things to supplement their diet occasionally. But they eat virtually no leafy vegetation. They have no ability to taste sweetness, so most fruits would not be particularly appealing to them. Um, so I imagine, yeah, meat is going to comprise the majority of their diet. And so that led me down a line of thinking of, you know, unless I'm completely off base with this, I would think that plants would be easier to store long term, especially in the equivalent of like the Paleolithic, than meat. And so it could be seen that like plants are more of a like a not necessarily a starvation food, but like something you only really resort to eating plants when there's nothing else around. And so meat could have more of a symbol of like prestige to it. Like if you're gonna treat someone well, if you're gonna give them like a meal that's worth anything, you give them meat. Um, there could still be plants incorporated in the same way as like herbs and spices and things, but like the equivalent of eating bread, I guess, would be seen as like that's a very low status food, I guess. So that was my first thought. Um, and then my second thought was something that I can't remember now. Oh yes, the second thought was that if they once they reach the point of agriculture and domestication, I imagine a large portion of the crops that they're going to be growing will specifically be fodder for their livestock. Um, and there's some question as to like the efficiency of that. But if that's the case, then there could be this association in some cultures where plants are specifically like they're for feeding animals, not feeding neotats, not for feeding sapient beings. So it could be like they could be like plants are seen as like animal food, sort of, and so that could like feed into the fact that they're sort of low status. So those were my thoughts. Um, yeah, I don't know if they make sense.
So let's go through the points kind of one after each other. So on the first one, it was basically that, of course, if they don't have the kind of taste receptors, then they may not enjoy. Like, I understand that they may not enjoy plants at all. Um, I was thinking though that there are some experiences, um, things like spiciness and um, pungency in general. So, like
Mm,
what you get from things like mustard as well, where they I don't know how we biologically perceive them, but they are considered, there's something like next to taste because we get a physiological reaction to them that you like. I don't think if people who have lost their sense of taste may still be able to experience certain sensations in the
mm,
mouth that are from other things. So you could have a path where, like, say you have a renouncer culture in your neotexts where they say, we've seen the error of our carnivorous ways and we are going to live entirely off of plants. They may develop very specific cooking styles so that they can properly process plants, and so that they can enjoy eating them, basically.
okay.
Um, Otherwise, um, my first thought was that, um, basically, uh, as you had said, I think I'm going to mess the two answers up now. Basically, in the idea of storage, one theory I've heard about the success of nomads in a kind of pre-modern history is basically that their herds of domesticated animals function essentially as a kind of movable food store.
Uh,
And so if the neotexts have domesticated these animals, all they have to do to maintain a food store is be able to keep them alive.
uh,
And the easiest way to do that, if they have enough space where they're living, is to be nomadic pastoralists rather than devote a lot of time and energy into agriculture, because
sure.
um, agriculture, um, once agriculture gets going, so if the vegetarian neotexts or the omnivorous neotexts um, really find a way to make it work for them, like they start eating huge amounts of like carbohydrate mustard leaves or whatever, like they find the crop that works for them, then they and their population increases as a result. They then become dependent on agriculture to sustain this population, basically. And so you have this relationship where it's like, have we domesticated the plant or has the plant domesticated us,
Yeah,
you know?
I've heard that question posed a lot.
Um, and then if if the nomads need more food, what's easier and faster for them is it for them to start growing their own food, which may mean that they're tied down to a certain area, or do they start just invading the vegetarian neotexts and using the food stores that they've generated to feed their population to feed their plants, or they can demand in return for not committing violence against them some
Mm.
kind of tax or tribute from them in the form of some kind of fodder crop. Um,
Okay.
because, as I said, the other thing would be if if the if you're carnivorous ones, then like a lot of this is based on uh, like the conquest theory of state formation. So this is all like very strongly in one theory and one theoretical basket. So you feel free to like reject it, because it's like this would be very strong. Like I don't really want to like push you in one direction too heavily. Like this is the only way that food could work for them.
Sure.
But um, the vegetarian ones could then end up basically becoming an underclass for your like this would basically very heavily model what happens in humans, and in humans it works because we're more omnivorous basically, right? I don't know exactly how it would work if you can't get past the um, question of like how much intake of certain nutrients do you need to survive, because if people are
Mhm.
dying then it's not going to carry on basically. um,
Yeah.
could you explain what George means by they're less migratory than
Yeah.
humans?
So generally speaking, at least the Neotets ancestors were they lived in an environment where the distribution of resources was very patchy. So you had small, relatively fertile territories surrounded by basically inhospitable arid landscape. So that forced their ancestors to build these um, that you had more or less a single kinship group around one fixed patch of territory. Um, and so they, because of that, at least as I'm conceiving of it at the moment, the early societies will be more sedentary than human ones, and they'll have less of a propensity to like spread out as quickly as humans did to basically invade the entire rest of the world. Um, But that being said, I think once they do move into environments that have a different distribution of resources, then I think nomadism can evolve, especially if they have a predictable movement between they could be they could still have fixed settlements, but they move between them on a seasonal basis.
Hmm.
Um, and that opens up the possibility of pastoralism, as you say. Um, yeah, still working out the details though.
Mm-hmm. So in this arid area, is there what is there? Is it like a desert?
It's a yeah, kind of between desert and like arid steppe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah,
Because
cold
if
steppe as
there is
well.
some kind of if there is something that can occupy that niche, then I'm trying to think like because I guess humans are particularly migratory, aren't we? Well, not migrate. I don't know what the right word is.
Very good at getting around, that's for sure.
Mhm. Because um, I guess yeah, I could see that like if you have these patches of food, basically, that they would then fight to protect them, as you've
Mhm.
suggested. But what happens when the food runs out? It's my
Yeah,
question.
at that point they will be forced to move to a new territory.
So, um, yeah, you. I'm trying to think if there are any. this is where anthropology is maybe less useful because all of the examples I know are with humans. And
Mhm.
so I'm trying to like yeah, like Madeli's saying, like I would what I would expect is if if you have a group, you'd have to have the groups would end up having to be quite like there are Amazonian cultures, right, where they will kill children that are born if they can't support them in their group because
Wow.
they know that I don't know if this happens these days. I think this may have been and also because I don't think it happens these days, I suspect that there is also a high likelihood that this is some colonist that's gone over. Um, I feel like the reasoning is specific enough that it doesn't sound entirely made up. But anyway, the idea was that if they had two children who would have to be with the mother to be able to move through the forest, if there was another child, they would have commit infanticide basically because they simply couldn't support the next person.
Mhm.
Um, and so there could be a cultural development. Yeah, not everything bad was made up by colonists, but saying that the non-Christian people are killing their children is quite a classic technique that Christians did. And I'm saying that as a Christian. Like we didn't lie about everything, but people would they'd take one example of something and apply
Mhm.
it to a whole group. But anyway, um, in I think that there is enough logic in that story that you could say that there would be these highly defended sources of food, and um, and they would have cultural mechanisms to um, to basically maintain that population. But um, if if you had a group that needed more food, surely they would end up going to one of the other hotspots. And I guess it would depend on how like well fortified the hotspots are in that. But
Mhm.
you could end up with like you'd have like I'm thinking that groups would end up splitting or whatever, and you would end up with like very strong competition between these groups, right? Rather than
Yeah.
um, and I think it's also just that like because there aren't there aren't really carnivorous human populations that don't and and they wouldn't have um like the closest I can think of is things like obviously elephants not being carnivorous, but the equivalent of where when people take carnivores as exotic pets, basically, they end up having to put a huge amount of wealth into these animals in order
Mhm.
to maintain them.
Yeah.
Um, and the whole story with the white elephant is that the these what we think of as gifts basically become burdens to the societies that try and sustain things with very high cost for a very long period of time. Um, and so I'm thinking like what happens to after the neotech's demise when when the like I can see that if it could work for like a period of time, right? But then what happens when the system breaks? Like, what's the next part of the story? Um,
Hmm.
um,
I'll throw in for what it's worth as well that the neotets are weakly eusocial, so there are only certain individuals in any particular kinship group that breed. So they do have a kind of population control going on, um,
mhm.
if that impacts anything. Um, But
It
yeah,
would
in
help.
terms of livestock, yeah, um, I anticipate that they're going to um, leave this sort of patchy resource environment is only going to be like the equivalent of their. I don't know if the term like cradle of civilization is still being used. That's not even the right, not even civilization, just species in general.
I'm thinking of like Urheimat, but that's obviously for the language more
Yeah,
than.
yeah, the Urheimat of the Neotech species is this particular landscape. Um, but they will fairly rapidly um, move to uh, more hospitable places. So it will be there might be some sort of lingering like cultural and um, I guess to some extent instinctive traditions
Mm.
based around that sort of starting point, but like they will be able to work out like they can do things differently in different environments. Like, and speaking of which, I will actually be discussing these sorts of things tomorrow on a stream with Lands Unknown. I can't
Mm.
remember what the time for that one is, um, but yeah, stay tuned for that.
Check the
Uh,
website.
yeah, it's on the
Yeah,
schedule. In fact,
it's on the schedule. Okay. Well, it's about time to wrap up. I feel a bit bad because I don't know what's next. You're on again, aren't you?
I'm on again in 2 hours, I believe. I will be over on Hannah's channel to discuss Neolithic architecture. But I believe the very next stream after this one is George's stream over
Hmm.
on Conlangery. And because I wasn't able to do the redirect thing properly, if I go like that,
Yep.
so that should take you into that one. And George is going to be, yeah, helping World Building Pasta make a naming language.
It's very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
George gets to
Um,
do the job that me and Mouse had yesterday. Although I don't think I did very well with it. Anyway,
no, you did good. You got
yeah.
Lexergy up. Like that's quite an accomplishment to do within the time frame that we had.
I I don't know. I think I'm reasonably fast with it now, but it just takes so long. That's why I didn't do any diachronics for my original suggestion, and then the Empire came. Yeah, subscribe to
For
our
the Empire.
Patreon. Anyway, I am on after you. Um, I I've got my religion stream, which will have maybe an even spicier comment section. Um,
Ooh.
and this is after your third stream of the day with Mateus.
Yes, the third stream of someone more qualified than me teaches me something that I don't know about. Um,
Well, it's
and that
been
will
fun.
also be on my channel. Good. I'm glad it was fun. And I feel more equipped to tackle these sorts of things now. This has given me lots of inspiration.
I'm glad.
Um, yeah, very good. Um, yeah, it's ironic that the this wasn't the spicy one because this is the one about food. Um,
Uh,
cool. Well, we
yeah.
have um, 1 minute remaining. So, how about a 1 minute speed run of the regionalization?
I already gave my one word thing. Um, I I would say most interesting thing that came up was maybe have a look at Somali pasta. I think Somali pasta is maybe underrated or maybe seen as a bit of a gimmick, but it's a very interesting product of Italian colonization of Somalia. No elk urine.
There will be no elk.
There's, I don't think. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see.
Well,
You can incorporate
on
that
that
into
note,
your con world cuisines.
well, that's it for us. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And now go and watch George's stream.
Yeah.
I'm going to press the end stream button now. Bye bye.
Bye.